Hey, folks, Eric Stacklebeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. I hope everyone had a great weekend. It was not so great for members of the Israeli government in that the International Criminal Court, it's based in The Hague in the Netherlands, is now considering arrest warrants against Israeli leaders, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, reportedly, as well as Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, Israel Defense Forces Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, and others. Now, the International Criminal Court has long, world bodies in general, right? The UN, of course, the International Court of Justice, or ICJ. We just talked about that here on the newscast about 2 months ago and what they're doing, courtesy of South Africa pushing genocide charges against Israel. But, folks, these world bodies in general are rabidly anti-Israel. Look no further than the UN, which has passed more resolutions against Israel. Really wrap your head around this. More against Israel, a nation the size of the state of New Jersey, which has only existed in its modern incarnation since it was miraculously reborn in 1948. More UN resolutions against Israel than any other nation, including North Korea, the then Soviet Union, China's communist regime, the Iranian regime, the Assad regime, Cuba, Saddam Hussein, the list goes on and on. No, more against Israel than all of those tyrannies, probably combined. Hundreds upon hundreds of resolutions against Israel since the birth of the UN in the 1940s. And that continues unabated. And we've talked about that here in the newscast. But the International Court of Justice as well. South Africa spearheading the efforts there to bring Israel up on so-called genocide charges. And now the International Criminal Court. Now, folks, this fits with a pattern. They're following the lead of the UN, of the ICJ. So this is not a shock. But when I said at the top it wasn't the greatest weekend for Israeli leaders, they're highly concerned about this. Now, me not looking at it in the natural, but looking at this is a spiritual battle that Israel's locked in right now. We're going to talk more about that today. But knowing that God's hand of protection will be over them. But it's tough for them, I guess, to see the forest from the trees, as they say, when there is a possibility of the International Criminal Court attempting to make you a pariah, an international pariah, in essence, by bringing you up on war crimes charges. Now, the reason Israeli leaders are so concerned about this, and by the way, Israel is not a part of the International Criminal Court. Israel is not privy to the ICC. Israel has no obligation to respect the decisions, the rulings of the ICC. Let's just lay those cards on the table right now. But the reason Israeli leaders are concerned is that, number one, if the ICC does issue these arrest warrants, it could make it difficult for Israeli leaders to travel. Does some international kind of body, international police force, law enforcement, what have you, try to arrest Israeli leaders? Say an Israeli leader is visiting London or Berlin or Paris. And especially Israeli leaders are concerned about the possibility of secret, so-called, arrest warrants being issued by the ICC. Whereas Israeli leaders travel, they don't even know there's an arrest warrant put out for them by the ICC, and they're arrested. Are they hauled before The Hague, before an international tribunal as war criminals? That seems to be the goal of the International Criminal Court. Now, folks, you might say, you know what? Israel, again, God's in control, and he is. Israel is not a party to the ICC. And these international bodies, all they do is blow smoke. They're a joke, the UN, etc. But Israel is also concerned that all of a sudden, you give ammunition to, the kinds of demonic, anti-Semitic rabble-rousers who are seizing American universities right now, nationwide, where I'm sitting here in the United States, and you're giving them ammunition to say, see, it's not just us saying that Israeli leaders are war criminals, the IDF are war criminals. The International Criminal Court, The Hague, is even saying it. An international body, international judges, they're saying it. And all the anti-Israel rabble-rousers who were swept up in this demonic, and that's what it is, demonic anti-Semitic wave right now, can cite the International Criminal Court as backup, as quote-unquote legitimacy for their cause, and they can cite the International Court of Justice, those genocide charges, which that talk went into overdrive around February. We were talking about that a bunch on the newscast. That's why it's dangerous. Now, we're going to break it down more in a minute. Before I do, hey, quick reminder. If you're just joining us here in The Watchman, it may be your first time. And even if it's not, and you have not yet subscribed, hey, make sure to hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Folks, we're fast approaching 1 million subscribers for such a time as this. We'd love to get there in 2024. That's one of our goals, not for our glory or our edification, but because we want to get a message of truth out to the world. In times of universal deceit, seemingly, Prophet Isaiah talked about it. Good called evil, evil called good. That's where we come in cutting through the madness and bringing you biblical truth. This is news and current events from a biblical perspective, unapologetically. So we would love if you could join us as a subscriber, shoulder to shoulder with us as watchmen and women on the wall for such a time as this. Again, so what do you think, folks, of this International Criminal Court possible a declaration of Israel war criminals? To me, it fits a pattern, obviously, number one. Number two, is this a real concern? If Israeli leaders travel abroad, that they'll be snatched up by the ICC and dragged before the Hague. I know it sounds insane, improbable. I get it. But folks, I would say in 2024, in these Bible prophetic times we are living in, expect the unexpected. And a lot of the horrific things that have been happening in the world over the past few decades, in specific, have happened, and we said this about 9/11, because of a lack of imagination, not on the part of the people who carried these deeds out, the demonic people who carried these out, but on the part of the people who were the targets, who thought it'll never happen. They're deterred. 9/11, October 7th. The list goes on. It can happen. They won't do that. They're deterred. They don't have the guts. They don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the capabilities to do that. And then they did it. And now everyone says, wow, why didn't we see that coming? So I'm not so quick to just blow off these proclamations from the ICC, the International Criminal Court. And that's why we're doing this newscast today. And we're focusing partly on that. We're going to move on to the State Department here in the United States, some of their proclamations as well. But listen, folks, you need to be alert and aware. The Bible says, my people are destroyed. Strong word, perish in some versions, destroyed for lack of knowledge. Would you rather know or not know? Would you rather me mince words? Would you rather me tickle your ears? And would you rather bury your head in the sand like an ostrich? Or would you rather know, again, in these prophetic times that we're living, what's going on in the world? Not to fret over it and lose sleep over and say the sky is falling. No. To know how we, as ambassadors for Christ, can be light in the darkness, can intercede against it. You owe it to your kids, your grandkids, to know what's going on. And guess what? When you're touching Israel, you're touching the apple of God's eye. So in this day and age, in particular, if it involves Israel and Israel's at the center of the storm, as a believer, you want to sit up and take notice. What we're seeing here fits with a pattern of, okay, international bodies, ICC, ICJ, UN, European Union. I'd even say it's not an international body, it's a sovereign government, but the U.S. government. We'll talk about that in a minute. Some new declarations by the State Department, which will make your blood boil regarding Israel. And then we see at the micro level, I guess you would say, with protests breaking out across the world in major cities, college campuses, we see a groundswell. And it seems the one thing that the radical left, radical Islam, and elements of the far right neo-Nazi wing can all agree on is that they detest Israel and the Jewish people. And there's real evil there, folks. What's happening right now is I've called it a wave. It's an anti-Semitic wave sweeping the world and literally to the four corners of the earth and legitimized, quote unquote, now by international bodies like the International Criminal Court. And if you're a Christian, here's two things. If you're a Christian and you think it doesn't impact me, guess what? The same mobs at Columbia University, Yale University, campuses across the United States, London, Sydney, Australia. Oh, and the marchers, did you see this, folks, over the weekend in Hamburg, Germany, who called for the establishment of an Islamic caliphate? Yeah, them. All of these people not only despise Jews and the world's one and only Jewish state, they also have no love lost for Bible-believing Christians. There's an old rallying cry in the world of radical Islam. First, the Saturday people, the Jews, then the Sunday people, the Christians. Now, I unpack this tonight on my brand new show, Stacklebeck Tonight. It's on TBN, the world's largest Christian television network. You can, wherever you live, your cable provider, trust me, carries TBN. It's seen in some 100 million homes throughout the United States. If you're not in the US, you don't get TBN, just pull up the TBN app. It is TBN Plus, tbnplus.org. You can watch Stacklebeck Tonight there. But I encourage you to watch it on the big screen because I'm old school. That's the way I like to watch it. But every weeknight, Monday through Friday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time and 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time, twice per night, Stacklebeck Tonight. If you like what you hear on The Watchman every day, you will love Stacklebeck Tonight. We're hitting on these issues. We're expanding them with great guests in a beautiful studio here in Dallas-Fort Worth. We'd love for you to tune in. And we believe, again, this is a show we just launched on March 25th. It's a show for these times. And tonight, we unpack how it starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. So Christians who are not paying attention to what's happening with Israel and the Jewish people right now need to wake up. But we have a veneer of legitimacy on these protests now because of the ICC, the ICJ, UN, etc., or at least they would like to think that. But then we have the State Department as well. Again, it gives a veneer of legitimacy and credibility to these protests. When the U.S. State Department, I'm going to pull this up right now, folks. Or maybe I'm not. But I have a few things pulled up here I want to share with you guys. But here's the deal. To boil it down to its barest essence, the U.S. State Department declared today that 4 Israeli military units of the IDF. I was going to quote directly. I can just tell you off the top of my head. That's what I like to do anyway. 4 IDF units, according to the State Department, are guilty of human rights violations. That's the U.S. State Department accusing the Israel Defense Forces. And we talked about this last week when there were rumblings, folks, that, and by the way, if you miss any of our newscasts, just go to our homepage, right under newscast, you'll find them all. But we talked about this last week where the U.S. State Department reportedly was considering sanctioning units of the IDF, which I presume would prohibit any U.S. arms from going to those particular units. Economic sanctions, that's usually the way it works when the State Department levies that kind of thing. But now the U.S. State Department is saying 4 units in the IDF. And folks, the timing here, I mean, think about this. We are living right now in the most perilous time for Israel since its miraculous birth in 1948. More perilous, I believe, than the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. This is it. This is Israel's time of greatest need. And in its time of greatest need, its greatest ally in the world, the United States, drops this and accuses the IDF. When the IDF is in the middle of fighting an existential war for the survival of Israel, I do not exaggerate, against the likes of Hamas and Hezbollah, these Iranian-backed, bloodthirsty jihadists. When the IDF is doing that, now the U.S. government drops these human rights violation charges. It's just a disaster. I've called the Biden administration's policy with Israel absolutely schizophrenic. Would that be a good word to use? Upside, it's completely. On one hand, you help Israel intercept Iranian missiles 2 weeks ago. Then on the other hand, you accuse Israeli Defense Forces units of human rights violations. So the two kind of cancel themselves out at the end of the day. And the Biden administration, in an election year here in the United States, is trying to play both sides of the fence. They're trying to maintain support for Israel, but all those peaceful, largely peaceful, quote unquote, demonstrators, protesters at college campuses throughout the United States and in places like Dearborn, Michigan, who are railing against Israel and the Jews, these young Islamists and these young progressives, I call them regressives, who have aligned together. They're very vocal and they seem to be growing in numbers. Generation Z. The Biden administration wants their votes in November. So they have to pay at least lip service to them and throw them a bone as well. Let's sell Israel down the river and the Jewish people down the river in order to pick up Michigan in our win column in November. I mean, what a crass strategy. But that's what we're dealing with right now. And the U.S. State Department accusing Israeli units of war crime. That's where we're at, of human rights violations, in essence, war crimes. But they said, look, these violations were committed before October 7th. Okay, that doesn't soften the blow at all. It actually rubs salt in the wounds that you're doing this not even 7 months removed from October 7th, and you're supposed to be Israel's greatest ally. Speaking of which, folks, what do you think about all this chatter? We've got a very active chat right here, people in the chat room. We've got thousands with us from around the world. I saw South Africa earlier. I saw Scotland. What do you think of all this talk about an imminent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas? It seems like a truce is looming. Here's the latest. This article I can find, and I will read. I want to quote because I think it's interesting that Britain's Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, who's been really engaging in some harsh rhetoric against Israel, by the way, the British Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, who was the former prime minister. Just a side note there. Along with the Saudis, Jordan, France, Egypt, they're all in Riyadh right now in a meeting of several foreign ministers, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, part of a diplomatic push to bring an end to the Gaza war. Now, Israel, Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, is encouraging Hamas to take the deal that's on the table. It includes, quote, a 40-day pause in fighting in Gaza and the release of potentially thousands of Palestinian prisoners as well as Israeli hostages. Now, Israel reportedly wanted there's supposedly 130 hostages still in Hamas and Islamic Jihad captivity. Folks, I hate to say this, and I hope I'm wrong, but how many of the 130 are still alive? We don't know. And I hope all 130 are alive. That seems unlikely. Israel initially was asking, apparently as part of these ceasefire talks, asking for 40 Israeli hostages to be returned. Again, apparently in return for thousands of Palestinian prisoners. And there's a big difference. The Israeli hostages are hostages. These are innocent people ripped from their homes, out of their beds on October 7th, in some cases, and dragged into the hellscape of these underground tunnels in Gaza and held against their will. Whereas Palestinian prisoners are prisoners for a reason, because they committed crimes, were acts of terror, or were plotting acts of terror when they were arrested. Big difference. But Israel had been asking for 40 hostages to be released, and now Israel reportedly has lowered that number to 33 because they believe some of those 40 may no longer be with us. And among the 33, apparently focusing on women, children, the elderly, and people who are very sick. Folks, I don't know how many hostages are still alive. I hope most are. I just don't know. But I encourage you in the strongest terms to continue to pray for the hostages. I feel like they've almost been forgotten in some cases in the discussion here, in the broader discussion. Not forgotten, but That should be front and center still, that these people are living in the captivity of a demonic death cult, being tortured, raped, all the above. Please keep the hostages in your prayers for a miraculous rescue mission, a miraculous divine hostage rescue that brings them home to their loved ones. And pray for their loved ones, pray for their families as well. What they're going through, what they've gone through for nearly 7 months now, the human mind can't even comprehend the level of barbaric evil they're facing. Well, let's pray for miracles, because God is the miracle worker. And many instances in the Bible where there were miraculous hostage rescues, whether it was in the book of Genesis, and Abraham and his men saved his nephew Lot, or when David and his men recaptured, reclaimed their wives, their children that were stolen by their enemies. So God's arm is not too short. Let's just say that. But what do you think of this? This would be a 40-day cease in fighting. 40 days, it's a long time, over a month. Thousands of Palestinian prisoners released, and then 33 perhaps Israeli hostages. What do you think? Do you think it's a good deal? Do you think Israel should do this? Two things here, and I hate to say, well, I'm kind of expecting the worst, but two things here that I have considered. Actually, three things that I've considered. Number one, okay, Israel agrees to basically, for the time being, kill the operation in Rafah. Now, remember, there are 4 still actively operating Hamas units. Most of them have been smashed, but 4 are still very much alive and hunkered down in Rafah, right along the Egypt border. Now, to give you an idea of the numbers, what Israel has accomplished in Gaza in the past 6.5 months, I think it is something like, let's see. There we go. 45%, about 45% of Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists in Gaza, both Iranian proxies, have been killed or captured so far. So nearly half of all Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters nearly killed or captured. 65% of Hamas terror assets, including tunnels, arms production sites, rocket launchers, all destroyed by the IDF during the war. So great accomplishments, no doubt. 65% of Hamas's terror arsenal and infrastructure destroyed. 45% of Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters killed or captured. On its face, great accomplishments, but folks, I don't know, that leaves half of all those jihadis still breathing and still presumably active. And still, if the IDF were to pull out and not finish the job, still more than willing to reestablish that terror infrastructure, get Iranian funding, assistance, and start the whole thing over again with the end game and the end goal of more October 7ths. So Israel's made great strides, but there's clearly more to go. And that's just not me saying it. I'm just saying this based upon the statements by Israeli leaders who've said our goal is to completely destroy Hamas so that it can never have any power in Gaza ever again. Right now, Israel's not there. They're getting closer, and Rafah would certainly go a long way towards that. But does Israel just cancel the Rafah operation? I find that unlikely. But is the international pressure so pronounced that they do? Beyond those 40 days that this truce, the ceasefire might establish? Folks, we shall see. But man, that doesn't seem very wise. Needless to say, you're leaving Hamas alive and kicking. And by the way, key point here, this is under relentless Western pressure led by the United States. That's the only reason Rafah hasn't fallen already and the IDF didn't go into Rafah weeks ago. It's because of this persistent, relentless, incessant hectoring and arm twisting by the Biden administration and other Western leaders. And that's the bottom line. Israel has been fighting this war with one hand behind its back. But consider this. This is one consideration. If this ceasefire is agreed upon, does Israel do a hard pivot, an essentially immediate pivot, to the north and to Hezbollah. Is that part of Israel's strategy here where they said, look, Hamas is mostly pacified. The Hamas and Islamic Jihad totally on the ropes right now. They're not really capable of mounting any kind of serious offensive against us. Now is a golden window to smash Hezbollah. Once again today, dozens of Hezbollah rockets fired into northern Israel yet again today. Folks, this is practically every day. The arsenals of dozens of Hezbollah rockets are coming into northern Israel. It's a daily occurrence now. It's unsustainable. You've got at least 80,000 residents of Israel's north who are evacuated from their homes, living out of suitcases and hotels with no date as to when they're going home. Much of Israel's north right now is a ghost town. It's unsustainable. You can't have it. If you want a fully functioning country, you can't have one large region of the country essentially vacated and not operating, especially economically. So, folks, this is not brain surgery. Israel must and it will face off with Hezbollah, and sooner rather than later. But does a 40-day ceasefire in Gaza give Israel a window to do that? Does Israel say, okay, in this time frame, this is when we'll strike Hezbollah? I've certainly considered it as these talks have progressed. Number two, the Saudi factor. It seems that the Biden administration is dangling a Saudi peace deal in front of Israel. And they're saying, look, if you end the war now, you agree to a ceasefire, you don't go into Rafah, then you can have peace with Saudi Arabia and you will normalize relations with the Saudis. Folks, I know that Israel would love to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia, but I don't think that's the deal to make. If it leaves Hamas alive to fight another day, sorry, we'll do Saudi peace at another time. By the way, the Saudis won it, and it was very close before October 7th. And that's a major reason why Hamas moved when it did, to torpedo, to smash those talks, those normalization talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And for the time being, it did exactly that. But to show you how badly the Saudis won it, we're not even 7 months removed from October 7th. Israel's being accused in every quarter of war crimes, genocide, etc., against Muslims, Palestinian Muslims, and the Saudis are still coming to the table and interested, very interested, in doing a deal with Israel. So I said, Israel, I mean, look, I wait and say, you know what? Thanks, but no thanks. Not right now. We'll circle back with you later on normalization, but we need to handle our immediate business right now and destroy Hamas. We shall see. Again, the Biden administration doing massive arm twisting on that front as well and dangling that. And I hope Israeli leaders don't take the bait and agree to not finish the job in Gaza just so they can have normalization with Saudi Arabia. No. And lastly, along those lines, if Netanyahu would agree to that, kind of like I just laid out, right, then he's going to have a revolt, a rebellion on his right flank in his unity government. And I think members of the government would resign. There'd be an uproar within his own party in the Likud, the governing, the main party in the governing coalition. That's Bibi's party. So if Bibi did that, if Bibi does not accomplish the aim, the stated goal of destroying Hamas, and is seen as totally caving to the United States, in particular, this left-wing administration in Washington right now, I don't know that his government lasts. So I'd be shocked if he does it. And right now, folks, we need Bibi, Israel's leaders, both in the political and military realms, just have the wisdom of Solomon, hearts of a lion, and to be just totally reliant on the Lord, on the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and trust him over men. Trust God. Don't trust in men. Trust God. That's what I'm praying. Hey, speaking of which, you want to bless Israel. You want to bless the people of Israel. We've been telling you about our good friends, Meir Panim, mpgive.org. This is an incredible organization, folks. I don't endorse a lot of organizations here, but when I do, I like them, and they're doing great work. I believe Meir Panim's doing God's work. This is an Israeli humanitarian organization with incredible soup kitchens throughout Israel. You might say a soup kitchen. It's not what you're thinking. These are beautiful, state-of-the-art facilities, great food, great facilities where Israel's neediest come together. And they have a good meal, warmth, or shelter from the heat, shelter from the storm, literally and figuratively, a great home-cooked meal, fellowship. And these are not only, look, Holocaust survivors, the poor, the needy, reserve soldiers right now who are away from their families. All of Israel's neediest, the most vulnerable in some cases, are being helped, assisted, and blessed by Meir Panim. It's mpgive.org. We're in the midst of Passover right now. Passover wraps up April 30th. That's tomorrow night. This is a particularly important and sensitive time for Israel and the Jewish people where they could really use a few good friends, more than a few. We've got nearly 1 million subscribers here. Imagine the difference we all could make. Listen, Genesis 12 is very clear. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. And it almost goes without saying on this channel, but many people have cited that to me in commenting saying, hey, I am helping Meir Panim. I'm blessing Meir Panim because I want to fulfill Genesis 12:3. So I think that's incredible. And this is a great organization, if you want to do that, to do just that. It's mpgive.org. At a time of Israel's greatest need, Meir Panim stepping up and doing God's work. I encourage you to check him out. And hey, until tomorrow, thanks so much for watching us here on the Watchman Newscast. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching.